The night she told me was like any other. Or at least, that's how it started. We were sitting at the dinner table, plates of half-eaten food between us, the silence hanging heavy in the air. She'd been distant for weeks, but I chalked it up to the usual ups and downs of marriage. Everyone hits rough patches, right? But that night, there was something in the way she looked at me. Her eyes weren't filled with anger or sadness. They were blank, cold, almost detached. Then she said it. "He makes me feel alive." Just like that, 8 years of marriage unraveled in 6 words. At first, I thought I'd misheard her. My fork hovered midair as I tried to process what she just said. "What?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She didn't flinch, didn't backtrack, didn't soften the blow. "Ethan makes me feel alive," she repeated, her voice calm, deliberate, like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. I stared at her, searching her face for any trace of the woman I thought I knew. This wasn't the Amelia I'd married. The woman who used to laugh at my stupid jokes, who stayed up late with me dreaming about our future. This was someone else entirely, someone who had already packed her bags emotionally, even if they were still physically in our closet. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand how she could do this to me, to us. But all I could do was sit there, frozen, while the weight of her words crushed me. "How long?" I finally managed to choke out. She shrugged, as if the length of her betrayal didn't matter. "A few months. It doesn't change how I feel." Of course, it didn't. Why would it? She wasn't the one blindsided by this. She'd had months to prepare, to justify her actions, to convince herself she was the victim in all this. "I see," I said, my voice hollow. I didn't even recognize it. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, her tone softening as if she thought that would make it better. "I don't want to hurt you, James. I need to feel something again. Something more. Something more." Like I was a placeholder, a steady but unremarkable backdrop to the grand drama of her life. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my emotions in check. "And Ethan, he gives you that?" Her lips curled into a small, almost apologetic smile. "Yes, he makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years." The words hit me harder than I expected, each one cutting deeper than the last. She didn't just leave me, she belittled everything we'd built together, every moment we'd shared, every promise we'd made. I pushed my chair back and stood, the sound of the legs scraping against the floor breaking the suffocating silence. "Well," I said, forcing the words out, "I hope he keeps you feeling alive." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Regret, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She stood too, smoothing her dress like she was preparing for a meeting. "I'll stay with Claire tonight," she said. "I'll come by tomorrow to pack my things." And just like that, it was over. No tears, no apologies, no second chances. She grabbed her purse and walked out the door without looking back. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty space where she'd been. The house felt too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. Her words echoed in my mind. "He makes me feel alive." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat on the couch with a glass of whiskey in one hand and my wedding ring in the other, staring at it like it might hold some kind of answer. I let her walk away, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. She could keep feeling alive, for now, but not for long. After she left, the house didn't feel like my own anymore. Every room seemed louder in its silence, every corner haunted by the absence of her presence. The chair at the dining table where she sat, the couch cushion that still had the faintest indent from her weight, it all mocked me. I couldn't stop replaying the moment she said it. "He makes me feel alive." The words had been so deliberate, so cutting. She hadn't stumbled over them, hadn't hesitated. She had wanted me to know that leaving wasn't a mistake. It was her salvation. But salvation from what? I wasn't a cruel husband. I wasn't inattentive. I'd done everything I could to build a life with her. Our house, our routines, our plans for the future. It wasn't exciting, maybe, but it was steady. And apparently, steady wasn't enough for Amelia. I poured myself a drink and sat in the living room, staring at the blank television screen. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. For a moment, I let it ring, unwilling to face the outside world. But then it buzzed again. Marcus. I picked up.
What?
I said, my voice rougher than I intended. Well, hello to you too, he replied, his tone light but cautious. Lisa told me. Amelia, are you okay? Was I okay? I didn't even know how to answer that question. Not really, I said finally. I'm sorry, man, Marcus said. I didn't want to believe it when Lisa mentioned something was going on. But, do you want to talk about it? Not much to talk about, I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. She left. She's with him now. There was a long pause on the other end of the line.
Him?
Ethan. I spat the name like it left a bitter taste in my mouth. Her soulmate, apparently. The guy who makes her feel alive. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's cold. I don't even know what to say. I don't need you to say anything, I replied. I needed to hear a voice that wasn't hers. Someone who isn't going to sit across from me and tell me I wasn't enough. You are enough, Marcus said firmly. She's the one who screwed up, not you. His words should have been comforting, but they weren't. They felt hollow, like the kind of platitudes people offer when they don't know what else to say. I'll be fine, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I just need time. Listen, Marcus said. I know you're going to want to hole up and deal with this on your own, but don't. Let me help, okay? Whatever you need, I'm here. Thanks, I muttered, hanging up before he could say more. The truth was, I didn't want help. I didn't want pity or advice or a shoulder to cry on. What I wanted was revenge, not the messy, impulsive kind. I wanted something calculated, precise. Amelia had torn down the life we built together, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I spent the rest of the night replaying every conversation, every moment that had led to this. When had she stopped loving me? Was it gradual, or had it happened all at once? And more importantly, what did she see in him that she didn't see in me? My thoughts drifted to Ethan. I didn't know much about him, but what I did know made my blood boil. He was one of those smooth-talking types, all charm and no substance. A man who thrived on making women feel like they were the center of the universe, only to discard them once he got bored. I poured another drink and stared into the glass. Amelia thought he made her feel alive. She thought he was her escape from the mundane. But I had a feeling she didn't know him as well as she thought she did. As the night wore on, my thoughts grew darker. I wasn't going to yell or break things or wallow in self-pity. No, I was going to take my time. I would let her think she'd won, let her bask in her newfound happiness. But I'd be there, watching, waiting. She wanted to feel alive? I'd let her, but not for long. After Amelia walked out, her words lingered in my mind like an unwanted echo. He makes me feel alive. Over and over, they replayed, until they weren't just words anymore. They were a challenge. A declaration that Ethan was better than me, that he had something I could never give her. I wasn't about to let that slide. I didn't know much about Ethan, but what I did know painted a clear picture. He was one of those guys who wore confidence like a badge, charming his way into conversations and relationships. I remembered seeing him once at an office party Amelia insisted I attend. He was tall, good-looking in a polished, almost artificial way, and he had that smirk, like he knew he could get whatever he wanted. That night, I had dismissed him as harmless. A flirt, sure, but no threat. Now, looking back, I realized how naive I'd been. Ethan wasn't just a flirt. He was a predator, the kind of man who thrived on taking what didn't belong to him. If Amelia had chosen him, there had to be more to the story. I needed to know who he really was, and I wasn't going to wait for the truth to come to me. I started by digging into Ethan's social media. People like him always left a trail, photos, check-ins, posts that showed the world how perfect their lives were. His profile was no different. It was filled with pictures of him grinning at fancy restaurants, posing with expensive cars, and standing in front of vacation spots most people could only dream of. It was all surface level, though. Nothing real. No depth. Just curated moments meant to make people jealous. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. That's when I called Marcus. He wasn't just my best friend. He was a former cop turned private investigator, and if anyone could help me dig deeper, it was him. I was waiting for this call, Marcus said when I explained what I needed. I knew you wouldn't just sit back and let this guy walk away. I don't want to do anything reckless, I told him. I just need to know who he really is. If Amelia thinks he's worth throwing everything away for, I want to see what makes him so special. Marcus chuckled. Trust me, guys like him are never as special as they seem. Give me a couple of days, and I'll get you everything you need. While Marcus worked, I kept myself busy. Or at least, I tried to. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence oppressive. Every time I walked past Amelia's favorite chair or opened a cabinet to find her favorite mug still sitting there, it was like a punch to the gut. But I refused to wallow. Instead, I poured my energy into work, into the gym, into anything that would distract me from the hole she'd left behind. And in the back of my mind, I waited for Marcus's call. When it finally came, I wasn't prepared for what he had to say. Your boy Ethan has quite the history, Marcus said, his voice tinged with amusement. He's a smooth operator, all right. Multiple women, all married, all swearing he was their soul mate. He bounces from one to the next, and when things get messy, because they always do, he disappears. My grip tightened on the phone. So he's a serial homewrecker. Pretty much, Marcus confirmed. But it gets better. He's not just in it for the thrill. He's got a habit of draining these women financially. He convinces them to invest in business opportunities, gets them to buy him gifts, even pushes for joint accounts. And then he vanishes, leaving them to pick up the pieces. I felt a dark satisfaction settle over me. This was the real Ethan. Not the man who made Amelia feel alive, but a parasite who preyed on women like her. Do you have proof? I asked. Plenty, Marcus replied. Bank records, testimonies from his previous victims, even a couple of fraud charges that were mysteriously dropped. The guy's a walking scam. I leaned back in my chair, a plan already forming in my mind. Amelia thought she'd found something better, someone who could give her the excitement I couldn't. But she didn't see the truth. Not yet. And when she did, I would be there to watch it all fall apart. That night, for the first time since she left, I slept peacefully. Not because I was over her, but because I knew the storm was coming, and I was the one who was going to unleash it. Ethan had made Amelia feel alive, but soon, she'd see what that life really looked like, and I would make sure neither of them forgot it. After Marcus laid out everything about Ethan, the lies, the fraud, the manipulation, I felt a dark sense of clarity. The man Amelia had thrown me away for wasn't just a fraud. He was a parasite. A man who preyed on vulnerable women, convincing them he was their escape, their fresh start, only to leave them worse off than when he found them. The realization didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. If anything, it fueled my resolve. Amelia thought she had traded stability for excitement, traded a man who loved her for one who could make her feel alive. But the life she had chosen wasn't just a fantasy. It was a carefully constructed illusion, and I was going to dismantle it piece by piece. I started with the financials. Amelia and I still had a joint account, and while she hadn't accessed it since she left, I wasn't about to take any chances. With Marcus's help, I moved the majority of our shared funds into my personal account, leaving just enough to make it look untouched. If Ethan had convinced her to leave me, I had no doubt he'd also convince her to fund his lifestyle. Next, I looked at the house. It had been in both our names, but I was the one paying the mortgage. If she thought she could claim half of it after walking out on me, she was sorely mistaken. I called my lawyer, Mr. Grayson, who specialized in divorce cases, and explained the situation. She left you for another man? Grayson asked, leaning back in his chair. Exactly, I said, my jaw tightening. He nodded thoughtfully. That will work in your favor. Adultery can be powerful leverage in property disputes. If you want her removed from the deed, we'll need evidence. I've got that covered, I replied, thinking of the photos Marcus had collected of Amelia and Ethan together. Good, Grayson said with a small smile. Let's move quickly before she tries to make any claims. While the legal wheels were set in motion, I turned my attention to Ethan's victims. Marcus had connected me with two women who had fallen for Ethan's charms before. Both were hesitant at first. Talking about him brought up painful memories. But once they realized I wasn't looking to exploit them, they opened up. He's a master manipulator, One of them, Sarah, told me. He knows exactly what to say to make you feel special, like you're the only one who really understands him. And then? I asked. Then he asks for favors. Small at first. Can you help me with this project? Or would you mind covering dinner? But it escalates. Before I knew it, I was co-signing a loan for him. My stomach churned. Did you ever get your money back? She shook her head, her face hardening. No. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd already moved on to someone else. The second woman, Elena, had a similar story. He used me, she said bitterly. And when I confronted him, he made me feel like it was my fault, like I'd been too clingy, too demanding. Hearing their stories solidified my plan. Ethan had done this to countless women, and Amelia was just his latest target. She thought she was different, that she was special, but she wasn't. He was using her, just like he'd used everyone else. With Marcus's help, I compiled everything. Testimonies, financial records, even photos of Ethan whining and dining other women while still with Amelia. It was a damning collection of evidence, one that painted a clear picture of who he really was. But I didn't stop there. I started leaking bits of the information to local gossip blogs and forums, places where stories like Ethan's thrived. Anonymous tips about his scams, his lies, his pattern of destruction. Within days, whispers about him began to spread, tarnishing the golden boy image he had so carefully curated. At the same time, I made sure Amelia stayed in the dark. She was still living in her fantasy world, posting photos of her and Ethan on social media like they were the perfect couple. Every smiling selfie, every gushy caption about new beginnings only fueled my determination. She didn't see the cracks forming around her. Not yet, but soon she would. One night, Marcus and I sat in my living room, reviewing the progress. "You're playing the long game," he said, handing me a beer. "It's not just about revenge," I replied. "It's about showing her the truth." She wanted excitement. She wanted to feel alive. Fine. Let's see how alive she feels when everything comes crashing down. Marcus raised his bottle in a toast. To dismantling illusions. I clinked my bottle against his, a cold smile on my face. The storm was coming, and this time, I was the one holding the reins. The most satisfying part of dismantling someone's illusion isn't the destruction itself. It's watching the cracks form, little by little, as their world starts to fall apart. That's what I set out to do next. Plant the seeds that would slowly unravel Ethan's carefully constructed facade. Amelia was still living in her fantasy. I could see it in the photos she posted, the ones that screamed, "Look at me. I found the life I've always wanted." She and Ethan were everywhere. Fancy dinners, weekend getaways, all smiles and stolen kisses. It was like she was trying to convince the world, and maybe even herself, that leaving me had been the right decision. But she didn't know what I knew. The first step was to gather more voices. Ethan had left a trail of victims, and Marcus had already connected me with a few of them. Now, I reached out to others, those who had crossed paths with him in business or pleasure. It didn't take much to find them. Men like Ethan never clean up their messes. One of them was Laura, a former coworker who had almost lost her job because of him. "He's a charmer," she told me during a phone call. "Makes you feel like you're indispensable, that you're the only one who can help him. Then, when things go south, he disappears, and you're left holding the bag." Laura had emails, receipts, even recorded voicemails from Ethan promising to make things right before ghosting her completely. I added them to the growing folder of evidence Marcus and I had compiled. Next, I reached out to a local journalist, Megan, who specialized in exposing scams and frauds. Her column in the city's lifestyle magazine was known for taking down self-proclaimed big shots. "This guy sounds like a gold mine," Megan said when I laid out Ethan's history. "Multiple victims, financial scams, and he's still out there conning people?" "Yeah, I can work with that." She promised to write a feature, but I asked her to hold off for a bit. Timing was everything, and I needed the article to hit when it would do the most damage. While Megan prepared her story, I began leaking pieces of information online. Anonymous posts on forums and social media hinted at Ethan's true nature. "Beware of this man," I wrote on one local relationship advice page. "He's a con artist who preys on vulnerable women." At first, It was just whispers, a faint undercurrent in the vast ocean of the internet. But the posts started gaining traction, and soon people were sharing their own encounters with Ethan. Women who had dated him, worked with him, or simply crossed paths with him began speaking up, painting a picture of a man who thrived on manipulation and deceit. The impact was slow but deliberate. Ethan's social media presence, once filled with glowing praise and admiration, began to show cracks. Comments on his posts became more pointed, less flattering. People were starting to question his authenticity, and he couldn't block or delete them fast enough. Amelia, of course, was oblivious. She was too caught up in her whirlwind romance to notice the storm brewing around her. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the seeds I'd planted grew into something she couldn't ignore. The most satisfying moment came when Marcus handed me a file detailing Ethan's most recent con, a fake business venture he had convinced a wealthy widow to invest in. The deal had fallen apart when the woman discovered his lies, but Ethan had somehow avoided legal trouble, likely by threatening to expose her personal secrets. "That's the final piece," Marcus said, handing me the file. I nodded, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It's time to bring it all together. With the evidence compiled, the victims united, and the public whispers growing louder, I set the final plan in motion. I coordinated with Megan to publish her story the same week. I anonymously sent the file to the widow, encouraging her to press charges. At the same time, I made sure Amelia's best friend, Claire, got a copy of the article. Claire had always been skeptical of Ethan, and I knew she wouldn't hesitate to share the truth with Amelia. The pieces were falling into place, and the cracks in Ethan's perfect world were widening. Soon, it wouldn't just be Amelia who saw him for what he really was. It would be everyone. I poured myself a drink that night, sitting in the quiet of my new apartment. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. I didn't know how Amelia would react when the truth finally hit her, but I knew one thing for sure. She had wanted excitement, something that made her feel alive. Now, she'd feel the chaos of watching her new life crumble, and I'd be there to watch it all unfold. It didn't take long for the seeds I'd planted to sprout. The perfect little world Amelia had built with Ethan was starting to crack, and for once, I felt no guilt about what was coming. She had chosen him, this charming fraud who made her feel alive. Now she was about to learn what that life really looked like. The first sign of trouble came through Claire, Amelia's best friend. I'd sent Claire a carefully anonymized version of Megan's article and some of the evidence Marcus and I had uncovered. I knew Claire had always been protective of Amelia, and despite their closeness, she never fully trusted Ethan. Claire didn't waste time. She called Amelia the day after reading the article, and, as I later heard, the conversation didn't go well. "Why are you doing this, Claire?" Amelia had snapped, her voice sharp with defensiveness. "I'm trying to help you," Claire had replied. "I'm telling you, Ethan isn't who you think he is. Look at this article. Look at these stories. It's all lies," Amelia had insisted. "People are jealous. They're trying to tear him down because he's successful and confident. You've always been suspicious of him, Claire. Maybe you're the one who's jealous." That stung Claire, but she didn't back down. "Amelia, I'm your friend. I've stood by you through everything. I don't want to see you get hurt, but if you're too blind to see the truth, there's nothing more I can do." Amelia hung up on her. I knew this wouldn't be enough to break Amelia's illusion. Not yet. Ethan had likely spun his usual web of lies, convincing her that the article was nothing more than a smear campaign, a fabrication designed to ruin him, and she wanted to believe him. After all, admitting the truth would mean admitting she had been wrong about him, about everything. But the cracks were there, and I had more pressure to apply. The second blow came when Megan's article gained traction. The story, which outlined Ethan's history of scams and manipulations, spread like wildfire across social media. People began tagging him in the comments, calling him out, demanding answers. Ethan tried to do damage control, blocking people and deleting comments, but it was too late. His pristine image was tarnished. Amelia couldn't ignore it anymore. The whispers had grown into shouts, and even her closest friends were questioning her judgment. One evening, Marcus called me, his tone amused. "You'll never guess what I just saw," he said. "What?" "Ethan, out at a bar. Not with Amelia, though. He was cozying up to some other woman, laughing, touching her arm. You know the drill. I felt a grim satisfaction at the news. Did you get pictures? Of course, Marcus replied. I've already sent them to Claire. Thought she might want to pass them along. I smirked, imagining the chaos this would unleash. Sure enough, Claire wasted no time forwarding the photos to Amelia. This time, Amelia didn't respond with anger. Instead, she fell silent. A few days later, I got an unexpected text from Claire. She's starting to question things. She hasn't admitted it yet, but I can tell. The pictures shook her. Good. The cracks were widening, and soon, everything would come crashing down. The final blow came when the wealthy widow Ethan had scammed decided to press charges. With Marcus's help, I'd provided her with everything she needed to build a solid case. Ethan was blindsided when the police showed up at his apartment with a warrant. Amelia, of course, was there. She watched as the man she thought had saved her was handcuffed and led out the door. That night, I sat in my apartment, sipping whiskey as I read the news. The headline was simple but damning. Local conman exposed. Fraud allegations rock high-profile socialite. I pictured Amelia, sitting alone in the apartment she and Ethan had shared, surrounded by the debris of her fantasy. She had wanted excitement, something that made her feel alive. Now she had it, in all its messy, chaotic glory. And I felt no pity. She had made her choice. All I'd done was let her live with the consequences. The cracks had become a collapse, and as I stared out at the city lights, I realized that I didn't just feel alive. I felt free. The storm I'd set in motion was finally catching up to Amelia. I could feel it, even from a distance. Claire's texts had slowed. The gossip threads were buzzing less about Ethan's escapades and more about Amelia's involvement. And my own sense of satisfaction had evolved into something sharper, colder. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, or maybe I was. Either way, I wasn't stopping now. It started with silence. Amelia stopped posting on social media. The curated life she'd so proudly flaunted. A picture-perfect romance, expensive dinners, glamorous trips, vanished overnight. No selfies, no glowing captions about new beginnings, no more Ethan. Then Claire called. She's starting to fall apart, Claire said, her voice heavy with a mix of concern and vindication. She hasn't been to work in days, and when I stopped by her place, she looked different. Different how? I asked, though I already had an idea. Like reality finally hit her. She didn't even argue with me this time. She just sat there, staring at her phone like she was waiting for someone to tell her it wasn't real. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. And Ethan? Claire let out a bitter laugh. He's gone, James. Completely ghosted her. After the arrest, he packed up whatever he could and disappeared, probably trying to stay ahead of the cops and whatever victims come after him next. She hasn't heard from him since. I couldn't help but smile, though I didn't let it show in my voice. Good. Maybe now she'll understand what she threw away. Do you think she regrets it? Claire asked cautiously. She's too proud to admit it, I replied. But yeah, she regrets it. She just doesn't know how to face it yet. A week later, I found out just how much Amelia was unraveling. It wasn't Claire this time. It was Marcus. He'd run into her at a coffee shop downtown. She didn't look good, man, he said when he called me. I almost didn't recognize her. She's lost weight, her hair's a mess, and she's got that vacant look, you know, like she's running on fumes. What did she say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She didn't see me, Marcus replied, but she was on the phone with someone. Sounded like her mom. She was talking about how she made a mistake and lost everything. My stomach twisted, though not with sympathy. She had lost everything, but she'd done it to herself. That evening, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, thinking about Amelia. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not really. She made her choice, and choices have consequences. But there was a part of me, buried beneath the anger and satisfaction, that remembered the woman I used to love. The one who laughed at my stupid jokes and curled up next to me on the couch. That woman was gone, just like the man I used to be. Still, I couldn't stop myself from wondering. If she had the chance to do it all over again, would she choose differently? A few days later, I got my answer. It was late, almost midnight, when I heard the knock at my door. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it. I'd spent months erasing Amelia from my life, dismantling the fantasy she'd built and exposing the reality she couldn't face. I wasn't sure I wanted to see her now, broken and desperate, trying to claw her way back to something she'd already destroyed. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door. There she was, standing in the dim light of the hallway, looking like a shadow of the woman she once was. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes, red and swollen, met mine with a mixture of shame and desperation. "James," she said, her voice barely audible. "Can I come in?" I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, letting her squirm under my gaze. Finally, I stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. She walked in slowly, her shoulders hunched, her movements hesitant. She didn't sit down, didn't make herself comfortable. Instead, she turned to face me, wringing her hands like a child caught doing something wrong. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Yeah," I replied coldly. "You did." The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, as if she didn't know where to start. Finally, she said, "I thought I wanted something more, something exciting, but all I found was nothing," I finished for her. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I lost everything, James. I lost you." I stared at her, my heart a mix of vindication and emptiness. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? To see her broken, to make her understand the weight of her choices. But now that the moment was here, it didn't feel the way I thought it would. "You didn't lose me," I said finally, my voice cold. "You threw me away." Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't reach for her. I just stood there, watching as the realization of her actions crashed over her. This was her reckoning, and I wasn't about to save her from it. The knock came late, long after I had stopped expecting anyone to interrupt my night. It was quiet but deliberate, the kind of knock that carries hesitation in its rhythm. I sat still for a moment, staring at the door from my spot on the couch. I wasn't sure why, but something told me who it was before I even stood up. When I opened the door, there she was, Amelia. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had once declared, "He makes me feel alive." That woman had walked out with her head held high, convinced she was walking towards something better. The one standing in front of me now looked hollow, as if life had drained out of her instead of filling her up. "James," she said, her voice shaky, "can I come in?" I didn't move immediately. I stood there, letting the moment stretch, letting her discomfort settle in. It wasn't vindictive, not exactly. It was just necessary. She had to feel this, to know what it was like to stand on the outside of something she had destroyed. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. Amelia walked into the living room, her movements slow, unsure. She didn't sit down. She just stood there, glancing around at the room as if seeing it for the first time. The space looked different, stripped of any traces of her. It wasn't our home anymore. It was mine. I don't know where to start," she said, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "Start wherever you want. It doesn't change anything." Her eyes flicked to mine, wide and tear-filled. I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She took a shaky breath and continued. "I thought I wanted something more. I thought Ethan was exciting, different. But he wasn't. He lied to me, used me, and when things got hard, he left. He just disappeared." Her voice cracked, and tears began to fall. She didn't try to wipe them away. "I see," I said, my tone cold. "And now what? You want me to feel sorry for you?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I don't deserve that. I know I don't. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything. For throwing away what we had. For hurting you." Her apology hung in the air, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. It was too late for that. "Why now?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Why come here and say this now? What do you expect me to do with it? She flinched but didn't back down. Because I realized what I lost, she said softly. I lost you. I lost the life we built together. And now I have nothing. Her words should have stirred something in me. Sympathy, pity, maybe even the faintest flicker of love. But they didn't. All I felt was a cold, unshakable certainty that whatever she had come looking for, she wouldn't find it here. You didn't lose me, Amelia, I said. You gave me away. You looked me in the eye and told me you'd rather feel alive with him than build a life with me. And now, you expect me to fix what you broke? I don't expect anything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I needed you to know that I was wrong. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to remember what it had felt like to love her. But that part of me was gone, buried under months of betrayal and disappointment. Thank you for the apology, I said finally, my voice calm but detached. But it doesn't change anything. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Do you? I asked, stepping closer. Do you really understand what you did? You didn't just leave me, Amelia. You destroyed everything we built. You took the life we had, the trust, the love, and you burned it to the ground. And now you think showing up here and saying you're sorry will make it all better. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. You said he made you feel alive, I continued. Well, how alive do you feel now? She couldn't answer. She just stood there, broken and defeated. Finally, I stepped back and gestured toward the door. You should go. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for something. Kindness, forgiveness, hope. But I had none of those things to give her. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. James, she said, her voice trembling, I'll never forgive myself for what I did to you. Good, I replied, because I won't either. And with that, I closed the door, leaving her on the other side. As I sat back down on the couch, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. This was it. The chapter with Amelia was finally closed. That watching Ethan's life crumble had brought me some measure of satisfaction, but it hadn't erased the damage he and Amelia had caused. That I still felt the sting of betrayal, even as I rebuilt my life without her. Marcus, ever the loyal friend, tried to lighten the mood during one of our usual hangouts. You know, he said, cracking open a beer, if this were a movie, this is the part where you ride off into the sunset, leaving a trail of chaos behind you. I chuckled, shaking my head. Yeah, well, life's messier than that. There's no clean ending. No, he agreed, raising his bottle in a toast. But there's still a damn good story. As the weeks passed, the noise around Ethan and Amelia began to fade. People moved on, as they always do, and I found myself with more time to focus on my own life. I started working out more, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in years, and even taking on new projects at work. It wasn't about filling the void Amelia had left. It was about reclaiming my time, my energy, my sense of self. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I thought about Amelia again. Not the woman who had stood at my door, begging for forgiveness, but the one I had fallen in love with all those years ago. She wasn't a bad person. She had made bad choices, yes, but I knew there was more to her than the betrayal that had defined our ending. Still, knowing that didn't change anything. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Claire called again, weeks after Amelia's visit. She's moving back to her parents' house, she said. She needs a fresh start. Good for her, I replied, my voice neutral. She wanted me to thank you, Claire added after a pause. For what? For not letting her off the hook. For forcing her to see what she'd done. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything at all. That night, I poured myself a drink and toasted to the future. Not Amelia's, not Ethan's, mine. The fallout was behind me now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Sometimes, destruction isn't the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of something better. And as I stared at the stars, I realized that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And that, I thought, was the ultimate revenge. When the dust settled, when the chaos of Ethan's downfall and Amelia's reckoning faded into the background, I was left with something I hadn't expected: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from surviving. I hadn't just weathered the storm, I had dismantled it. And now, standing in the quiet aftermath, I could finally see the horizon. Amelia was gone. Ethan was gone. The life I had built with her was nothing more than a memory, but it didn't feel like a loss anymore. It felt like a lesson, a reminder of how easily the foundations of trust and love can crack when left unattended. Life moved on. I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as a way to build something new. My colleagues, once wary of bringing up my personal life, began to see me differently, stronger, focused. Even Marcus commented on it one evening over beers. "You've changed," he said, tipping his bottle toward me. "In a good way. You're not just going through the motions anymore." "Because I'm not," I replied. "I don't have to pretend anymore. I'm finally doing this for me." Claire reached out a few weeks later. She wasn't calling for Amelia this time. She was calling to check on me. "She's doing better," Claire said, her voice softer than usual. "But I didn't call to talk about her. How are you?" I paused, surprised by the question. "I'm good," I said after a moment. "Better than I thought I'd be." "Good," Claire replied. "You deserve to be." There was a weight to her words that I didn't fully understand at first, but as I sat there, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I believed her. One evening, I found myself sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It was a quiet moment, unremarkable in its simplicity, but it felt monumental. I thought about Amelia, about the woman who had once been the center of my world. I thought about Ethan, the man who had torn that world apart. And I thought about myself, the man I had become through it all. They were all part of my story, but they didn't define me. I did. Raising my glass to the night sky, I whispered to no one in particular, "Here's to moving forward." Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back.